Hello everyone, Professor William Watkin here, and today I'm going to talk to you about privacy through the ages. People often talk about the rights of privacy, which legally do exist, but very little about what privacy is, how it came about, and in particular the odd relationship we have with privacy today. On the one hand, we constantly moan about loss of privacy, data theft, data harvesting, Russian hackers, alt-right trolls, and the darker aspects of the big tech companies. On the other, on a daily, perhaps even hourly basis, we hand over our private data to a whole host of social media and other platforms. We may resent it when Facebook, for example, sells our data to a third party, let's say Cambridge Analytica, which may have murky, even nefarious intentions. Yet we love it when we publish images of our kids being cute next to Father Christmas and we get 100 likes. Obviously something is not quite right here. It's as if we're looking to take back our privacy with our laws just so that we can cast it to the four winds again with our social media platforms and then complain that we have somehow frittered our privacy away and blame those same platforms for being the cause. Surely there has never been a generation so conflicted over privacy, so simultaneously self-aware of its preciousness and yet so complicit, thanks to our online activity, with its precariousness. Was it ever thus, or are we entering a new period of neo-privacy? Now, we weren't always private, by the way. It seems odd in our world to say this, but the idea of privacy is very much a modern, constructed one. Animals, and we are animals, don't have a sense of privacy. Ancient cultures on the whole also didn't have much to say about being private. We can even trace the development of privacy in the West back to the Greeks. They certainly had a sense of two worlds, a public and a domestic, but it is actually very much a modern sensibility to think that your home is a protected arena of your private life. In fact, the Greek home was like a mini-state or factory. It was full of people with jobs to do, many of which were slaves, who had no rights to speak of, certainly not of privacy. All sorts of intimate acts were performed in public in these houses because Greek internal architecture was actually very open and not conducive to personal, private space. I don't think the Greeks could be private because privacy is so strongly tied to the idea of the individual special subject, which was not central to Western culture really until the 18th century. Until you have a sense of something unique and internal to you that is private, which you possess, and which only you really know or understand, then the architecture, laws, and conversation around privacy simply don't occur. You could credibly argue that Jane Austen invented privacy in the early 19th century by giving her characters two personae, the public voice, we'll call that the avatar, and the internal, emotionally truthful monologue. And just as credibly you could argue and say that she abolished it, in that her narrative method, called for the record free and direct discourse, where the narrator lets you overhear what the character is thinking, was the first truly effective snooping device. In Jane Austen's fictionalised late 18th century, to have a private life meant not only to have a certain subjective state, complex enough to merit privacy, it was also the preserve of the rich. Privacy back then cost a lot of money, needing redesigns of rooms in large houses, for example, and it was supported by the space and time to have self-reflection, a space and time denied all but the most wealthy and free. This meant not only was privacy class determined, it was gendered and, of course, colonial. This theme of the price of privacy turns out to be a constant. In the 19th century, the Victorians exported privacy to all kinds of ordinary people, but again, at a cost. To have a private life, you needed to admit to its possible impropriety, and thus allow it to be policed by the dominant moral values of the time. Men and women were now allowed their secret desires as long as they were admitted that they were probably sinful. Josh Cohen, in his book The Private Life, makes the nice point that the Freudian construction of the unconscious in the 20th century is the ultimate upgrade in the history of the privacy app. Now we moderns have a part of our life so private we don't even know what it is because it is unconscious. This then is the most private privacy one can access. And on the back of that, the modern liberal individual is created. The cost of the unconscious? Loss of control. The very thing that defined privacy, it was personal to you, is the one thing you cannot be certain of because it is unconscious and only your therapist seems to understand the language it speaks. There we have it then. Privacy is a construct, not an essential human right. You can trace its development in the West and see it's very much a modern phenomenon. It's strongly tied to individualism and a sense of human rights. One of the peculiarities of the private is that it needs resourcing. Privacy requires time for self-reflection and a private space. To fund these resources, you need to subcontract out your privacy. Throughout its brief history, privacy must be built, and this costs money, so you need to mortgage it out to someone with a lot of capital who will agree terms with you because it transpires, whatever else it is, privacy is very much a currency. People will pay to know what goes on behind closed doors. And so it is today with what I would call the fifth age of privacy or neo-privacy. Those guys with a lot of cash you need to build your personal private grotto online are the big tech firms, of course. And how do they get the money to build the platform from which you can broadcast your private life? In a bizarre circularity by selling off your privacy to a third party, which is fine and dandy as long as that third party have filled out all the requisite privacy protection forms. But in the case of the tech firm Cambridge Analytica, infamously, this turned out to not quite be the case. Thank you everybody. I hope you enjoyed that content, and if you're interested in hearing more from me, you can subscribe to my channel or check out the links on the page here which are in the usual place.